Please. It's so cold. I can't feel my legs." His voice cracks, every word shaking with fear. Chloe's eyes fly open at the sound of the desperate plea, the raw panic cutting through the silence of her small, cold apartment. Chloe Davis, barely holding it together after 2 grueling shifts at Kroger, stumbles to the door, barely able to keep her eyes open. Her feet ache, her body aches, but there's something about the voice on the other side that freezes her in place. The winter air rushes in as she cracks the door open, revealing an elderly man shaking violently. His coat is soaked, his lips tinged with blue. "Emily, it's me, your father. I've been walking for hours, please let me in." Chloe blinks, unsure whether to close the door or let him in. "Emily, I'm not, she stammers. But the man's eyes faded. Desperate hold her still. Her heart races, unsure if this is some cruel prank or a lost soul truly in need. Her hand lingers on the door as the cold nips at her skin. Should she let him in? It's past 3 a.m. She's alone with her daughter, and this stranger looks like he's on the brink of collapse. What's the worst that could happen? Chloe swallows hard. She steps back, letting him in, not knowing the storm she's about to unleash. "Welcome back, my family. I'm truly happy to have you here again today. Thank you for your support, your kindness, and your beautiful comments. They're the reason I keep creating these stories every single day. Before we begin, I want to speak a quick blessing over everyone watching. I'm wishing you peace in your mind, strength in your spirit, and favor in everything your hands touch. May your home be filled with calm, protection, and unexpected blessings. And from my heart to yours, Merry Christmas in advance. May this season bring you healing, joy, and new beginnings. If you're watching and you haven't subscribed yet, please take a moment to do so. Your subscription, your likes, and your shares to friends and family help this channel grow and stay alive. And I would truly love for you to be part of this journey with us. Let me know where you're watching from in the comment section. Now, thank you again for being here. Let's get into today's story. Chloe barely had time to process what was happening before she found herself guiding the frail man into her tiny apartment. He leaned heavily on her, his weight almost too much for her tired body to bear. His coat, soaked from the cold rain and snow, left a wet trail across the floor, but she didn't care. She shut the door behind them quickly, locking it, trying to ignore the thumping of her heart. "Here, sit down," she urged, her voice soft as she helped him onto the couch. His shaking body was unsettling, like a leaf caught in the wind, fragile and lost. His eyes were half closed, his lips blue, and his breath shallow. Chloe had seen so many people broken down by life, but something about him, his condition, his age, the desperate way he'd pleaded for help stirred a deep, uneasy feeling in her gut. "Emily," he whispered again, his voice hoarse. His hand reached out toward her, trembling. Chloe paused, glancing back at him. "I'm not Emily," she whispered, her words barely more than a breath. "I'm Chloe. I just found you." The man didn't respond. His eyes fluttered closed, and for a moment he seemed to fall into some kind of restless slumber. Chloe stood there for a second, unsure what to do. Ayana, her 7-year-old daughter, stood frozen in the hallway, watching the scene unfold with wide, confused eyes. Her small figure was barely visible in the dim light, her pajamas loose on her thin frame. He tugged at the hem of Chloe's shirt. "Mommy, who is he?" Ayana's voice was quiet, hesitant, her innocent eyes filled with both curiosity and concern. Chloe turned and knelt down in front of her daughter, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's okay, baby. He's just lost. We're going to help him tonight, all right? He's just cold and confused. He'll be okay." Ayana nodded, but her eyes stayed on the stranger on the couch. Still unsure of the situation, Chloe could see her daughter's concern, and a pang of guilt twisted in her chest. She hated that Ayana had to witness this, hated that she was constantly having to balance survival with compassion. Chloe quickly turned away, her mind racing. She moved to the small kitchen, gathering a blanket and a cup of warm water, As she turned back, she noticed how the man's frail hands were now clutching at the fabric of his coat, as if it was the only thing holding him together. She kneeled beside him, carefully draping the blanket over his shoulders, her eyes scanning his face. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice trembling as she tried to make sense of the situation. She didn't know what to expect. What was she supposed to do for a stranger who couldn't even remember his own name? "Emily." His whisper was weaker now, almost inaudible, but there was something about the name he kept saying that gnawed at her. It was as if she knew the name. Emily. It sounded familiar, like a forgotten memory hiding somewhere deep inside her mind. Chloe shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. No, that didn't matter right now. What mattered was making sure this man was warm, making sure he was safe until she could figure out who he was. If he was even someone she should trust. She stood up, glancing over at Ayana, who had quietly moved closer to the man, her little hand resting on the couch. Chloe smiled faintly, relieved that her daughter seemed to have accepted the situation, at least for now. The uncertainty clawed at her. Was this really the right decision? She had no idea who this man was, or what kind of trouble he could bring. Her apartment was small and cluttered with the weight of her own struggles, overdue bills, the relentless chase for her next shift, the constant worry about keeping things together for Ayana. She had enough on her plate without taking on someone else's problems. But as she looked back at the man, his thin face drawn with exhaustion, something in her chest tightened. The coldness in the room seemed to deepen. This was more than just helping a stranger. This was a choice between keeping herself safe and doing what she knew was right, no matter the consequences. What if this act of kindness would come back to haunt her? What if he was dangerous? What if he had a story that was too painful to bear? Chloe's mind spun with possibilities. She was barely keeping her own life together. But then, as she stood there, looking at this lost soul, she felt the stirrings of a deeper question inside her. Could she really turn him away? Could she live with herself knowing she sent someone who needed help out into the cold, without a second thought? Could she live with the guilt of not helping? She moved back to the small chair by the window and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. Her exhaustion hit her all at once, her body sore from the long hours at work, her mind tangled with 100 questions. Her life wasn't easy. It never had been. She'd spent years chasing after the dream of a stable life for her and Ayana, but it always seemed just out of reach. Bills piled up. The world outside felt like a constant struggle, and still, she pushed forward because what else could she do? She couldn't stop. She couldn't give up. Her eyes flicked over to Ayana, who was sitting beside the stranger now, her small hand still resting on his. Ayana's face was calm, her dark eyes wide and thoughtful, but Chloe could see the concern there. A part of her wished she could shield her daughter from all of this. She wished she didn't have to make decisions that involved this much risk. But another part of her, the part that wanted to believe in something better, whispered that this man, this stranger, was not just another problem to be solved. Maybe he was a lesson. Maybe he was the answer to something she hadn't figured out yet. "Mummy, is he going to be okay?" Ayana's voice brought Chloe back to the present, and she met her daughter's eyes with a smile, the kind of smile that felt forced but sincere. "Yes, baby, he's going to be okay," Chloe reassured her, her voice steady, even though doubt lingered in her chest. But as the cold night stretched on, Chloe's heart began to settle, and she realized that whatever happened, she had done what she believed was right. Would that be enough? She didn't know, but for now, it was the only choice she had. If you've ever had to decide between your own safety and kindness, you know what this feels like. Sometimes we must take chances, even when the world tells us not to. Subscribe to support the decisions that change lives, one act of kindness at a time. Chloe barely slept through the night, her mind racing as she kept an eye on the frail man lying on her couch. His labored breathing echoed softly in the dim light of her apartment. Every time he shifted, Chloe's eyes snapped open, her heart tightening with concern. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this stranger, something she wasn't seeing. Emily. The name slipped from his lips again, weaker this time, barely above a whisper. She'd heard it so many times throughout the night that it had begun to haunt her. Every time he spoke, the confusion in his voice was more pronounced, and Chloe couldn't help but wonder, was this some form of dementia? Maybe Alzheimer's? Was he even aware of where he was? Or who she was? Chloe sat on the edge of the worn armchair, her hands clasped together tightly. The apartment was silent except for the occasional creak of the old building settling, but in her mind there was a constant hum of unease. What was she supposed to do now? She had let a stranger into her home, someone who wasn't just lost. He seemed to be drifting, adrift in some fog that kept pulling him away from reality. At one point, she stood up and moved toward the man. His face was pale, his skin cold to the touch, but he wasn't shaking anymore. He just lay there, his face drawn in pain as if the weight of his past was suffocating him. She sighed softly, kneeling next to him. She could hear his shallow breaths, each one a struggle. "Who are you?" Chloe whispered under her breath, unsure if she was asking the man or herself. She couldn't wait any longer. Chloe needed to know something, anything about him. She stepped over to the small pile of his belongings, still sitting in the entryway where she'd left them, his coat, heavy and waterlogged, draped across the floor like an afterthought. As she rifled through his pockets, Chloe found a wallet, smooth and expensive, much more than she'd ever owned. Her fingers hesitated for a moment before she opened it. Inside was a card, its glossy surface gleaming in the dim light. Brandon Collier, it read in sleek gold lettering. Beneath the name was the logo of a tech company she vaguely recognized, a giant in the industry. Chloe's stomach tightened. Brandon Collier. The name rang in her head like a bell. She'd seen it on the news, heard it whispered in certain circles. A billionaire, a powerful figure in the tech world who'd disappeared years ago, vanishing from the public eye after a scandal no one seemed to fully understand. And now, here he was, in her small apartment, confused and calling her Emily. A high-end watch slipped from his coat sleeve as Chloe pulled out the rest of his belongings. She stared at it for a long moment, the heavy gold band reflecting the faint light from the kitchen. This was no ordinary man. This was the Brandon Collier. Chloe dropped the wallet back into his coat pocket, a sick feeling rolling in her gut. She had no idea how to process this. How had he ended up here, in the freezing cold, lost and alone, under a different name? Why was he calling her Emily? Was he just a broken man, or something more? The sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the room. Chloe sat back down in the chair, the weight of the night's events settling over her. She glanced at Brandon. Still asleep, or was he? And felt an odd mix of relief and fear. She had kept him safe through the night. But what now? What kind of man had she let into her life? The questions swirled around her as the morning light grew brighter. Chloe realized, with a sinking feeling in her chest, that the stranger who called her Emily wasn't just some lost soul from the street. He was Brandon Collier. And whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. Chloe woke to the sound of soft murmuring. Her eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was the dim light creeping in through the window, casting long shadows across the room. The stranger Brandon was awake. He was still lying on her couch, but his eyes were clearer now, more focused than the night before. The confusion remained, but there was something else, something sharper in his gaze. "Emily." His voice was hoarse, thick with exhaustion. Chloe froze, sitting up slowly. She had heard that name too many times already. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "No, sir," she said gently. "I'm not Emily. I'm Chloe." He blinked, clearly disoriented. "Emily, you've always been there for me. Always. I'm so sorry." His words trailed off as his gaze grew distant. Chloe could see that he was trying to make sense of everything, but it wasn't quite clicking. His mind was a jumble of fractured memories, each one slipping away before he could hold on. Taking a deep breath, Chloe stood up and moved to the pile of belongings she'd left by the door. She didn't want to go through his things. She didn't feel right doing that, but something gnawed at her. There had to be more to this man than what he let on. She felt it in her bones. She rummaged through the wet coat, pulling out a small leather briefcase. It was sleek, expensive, far beyond anything Chloe had ever owned. As she opened it, She found a business card tucked inside, embossed with gold lettering. Brandon Collier, it read, followed by the logo of a tech company she recognized from the news, a giant in the industry, one of the biggest names in Silicon Valley. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Brandon Collier. The name was familiar, but she hadn't expected to find it in her apartment. He was the CEO of a massive tech empire, one that had vanished from the public eye years ago, swallowed up by scandal. The whispers she'd heard, the rumors she'd read about him, they all rushed back at once. She stared at the card in disbelief, then slowly flipped it over. Her fingers trembled as she read the rest of the information, the weight of the discovery sinking in. This was no ordinary old man. Brandon stirred on the couch, his eyes focusing on Chloe. His voice was faint, but she could hear the tremor in it. I had it all, he murmured, his words coming in fits and starts. The company, my life. And then it all fell apart. I couldn't take it anymore. Chloe's heart thudded in her chest. She slowly moved toward him, the briefcase still clutched in her hand. She sat down next to him, her voice quiet but steady. Brandon, you're not just anyone. You're Brandon Collier, aren't you? He blinked, as if hearing his own name for the first time in years. A faint recognition flickered in his eyes, but it quickly faded. He didn't respond right away, instead closing his eyes like the effort of acknowledging the truth was too much. Chloe stared at him, a swirl of emotions rising in her chest. She'd thought she was helping some lost man, some confused soul who had wandered too far. But now, she was face to face with one of the most powerful, wealthy men in the world, Brandon Collier. She had just let him into her home. The weight of the revelation hit her like a freight train. She felt her heart race, her thoughts spinning. Was he really who he said he was? Could it be possible that this billionaire CEO, whose life had crumbled under the pressure of the public eye, was now sitting in her apartment, times her, times tiny, crumbling apartment? What had she done? Had she just made a huge mistake? Chloe looked at Brandon, her stomach twisting. She had no idea what this meant, whether helping him would change her life for better or worse, but one thing was certain, her world would never be the same again. What had she just let in? And how far would this decision take her? Chloe couldn't stop staring at Brandon. His frailty, his confusion, it all seemed so real. But now, knowing who he truly was, everything felt different. Every word he spoke seemed to carry the weight of an empire, a past that Chloe had only glimpsed through the briefcase and the business card. Brandon Collier, the billionaire CEO who had disappeared without a trace. She paced around the room, trying to make sense of the chaos swirling in her mind. How had she ended up in this situation? How had a simple act of kindness led her into the world of secrets, wealth, and power that she knew so little about? Brandon, Chloe began, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure how to address him, whether he was still the lost man who called her Emily, or the tech mogul whose name was whispered in high society. Why did you leave everything? Your company, your life. Why hide? Why come here? Brandon's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite read. He shifted on the couch, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't want to be that man anymore, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't want to be the guy everyone envied, the one who had it all but was drowning in expectations. He paused, swallowing hard. I wasn't living. I was just surviving, running a company, running a life that wasn't even mine. I hated the person I became. Chloe's heart tightened. She couldn't imagine the kind of pressure Brandon had been under his entire life. A carefully curated illusion for the public, a persona he had to wear whether he wanted to or not. The weight of that kind of success could destroy anyone. I didn't know where else to go, he continued, his eyes meeting hers with a rawness that made Chloe's breath catch. I thought if I could just disappear, maybe I could find peace. Be someone else, someone ordinary, someone real. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had once controlled billions, now shaking slightly. But I can't escape myself. I can't escape what I've done, what I've lost. Chloe's skepticism began to soften, replaced by a growing sense of understanding. The man before her wasn't just a reclusive billionaire. He was a man burdened by his own success. He was a prisoner of his past, the same way she was often a prisoner of her circumstances. Maybe not to the same extreme, but the weight of trying to survive, of trying to keep everything together while everything was falling apart, that was something she could relate to. But still, Chloe couldn't ignore the voice in her head telling her that this was dangerous. She had invited a stranger into her life, someone who had the power to turn it upside down without a second thought. The uncertainty in her gut refused to leave. Chloe took a deep breath, her heart torn between empathy and fear. "Brandon, I understand, but I'm just trying to make sure I don't lose everything I've worked for." Her eyes flicked to Ayana, who was playing quietly in the corner, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in the room. Brandon's eyes softened. "I know I've asked a lot of you," he whispered. "I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful. I'm times grateful for it." Chloe nodded slowly, her heart weighing heavy. She still didn't know where this would lead, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, toward helping him, even if it meant putting herself at risk. Sometimes, Chloe thought, we don't know who we're helping. We don't know the full story, the consequences of opening our hearts to someone. But her compassion had already pulled her in, and now there was no turning back. She didn't know if she was making a mistake, but she knew one thing for sure. The decision to help Brandon might just change both of their lives forever. Sometimes a kind gesture can alter everything. It can change a life, and yours. Chloe sat by the window, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the coffee cup in her hand. The morning sunlight barely filtered through the drawn curtains, casting long, silent shadows across the room. The warmth of the apartment did nothing to chase away the chill creeping through her thoughts. Her life had always been a balancing act, working long hours at Kroger, fighting for every penny, keeping her daughter safe. But now, sitting across from a man who could change everything, she found herself at a crossroads. She had brought him into her home, offered him shelter, but was it the right choice? Every moment felt like it was building towards something she wasn't prepared for. Brandon sat across from her, his eyes distant, but his voice strong as he spoke of his past. "My company, it was everything," he said, his voice raw. "I built it from nothing. I pushed everyone to their limits, employees, myself. I thought that was the only way to win, but I didn't see it coming." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "They overtook us, my competitors. They took my company from me, piece by piece." Chloe listened, absorbing his words like a sponge. He had been on top of the world, and then just like that he had been brought down by forces he couldn't control. She could see the weight of it in his eyes. The years of fighting, the exhaustion of being at war with the world. "The lies," he muttered, shaking his head. "The scandals they made up about me. They twisted everything. I was a target. I couldn't run fast enough. So, I left." His gaze softened, almost like he was reliving it. "I had to disappear. It was the only way I could escape." Chloe felt a tug of sympathy in her chest, but a part of her, some practical, cautious part, knew this wasn't a fairy tale. This man was powerful, dangerous in ways she couldn't fully understand. Bringing him into her life could endanger everything she had. Ayana, her job, their fragile peace. "Is that why you came here?" Chloe asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "To disappear? To hide?" Brandon's eyes met hers, and for the first time Chloe saw something else, a glimmer of hope. "No," he said slowly. "I came here because I need to take back control. I need to rebuild. I can't live like this anymore. Hiding, running. I want to make it right. I want to fix what I lost." Chloe's heart raced as the weight of his words settled in. She had always been careful, protective of her little world. But something about Brandon's honesty, his pain, pulled at her. They were both trying to survive, in their own ways. She had never been in a position to help someone like him, someone so powerful, so far removed from the life she led. Yet here they were, sharing the same breath, bound by the need for redemption. Brandon sat forward, his voice firm. "I'll need your help, Chloe. I have a plan, but I can't do it alone. I want to come back. I want my life back." Chloe swallowed, feeling the weight of his request. the gravity of what was unfolding between them. She knew that helping him could change everything, her world, her daughter's future, everything she had built. But there was a deeper pull now, an emotional connection she couldn't ignore. As Brandon leaned in, the room seemed to shrink around her. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of what might come next, and yet she also saw a man who still believed he could rise from the ashes, who still held on to hope, but that hope might come at a cost. Helping Brandon could bring more trouble than she ever imagined, and Chloe wasn't sure if she was ready to face the storm he would bring with him. Brandon's health was improving faster than Chloe had expected. His color had returned, and the tremors in his hands had stopped. It was as if the warmth of the apartment and perhaps the quiet company had breathed life back into him. Each day, he became a little more alert, a little more present. The fog in his mind seemed to clear, but his memories were still fragmented, like pieces of a broken mirror. Despite his physical recovery, Brandon refused to speak about returning to the world he once ruled. Every time Chloe brought it up, he shut down, withdrawing into himself. "I can't go back," he would say, his voice distant. "I need to stay out of it. I need peace." Chloe didn't fully understand. She could see the drive in his eyes, the same fire that must have once powered his empire, but he wouldn't give in to it. Brandon seemed content to remain hidden, to live anonymously in her small apartment. But was he really content? Chloe wasn't sure. There were days when his silence felt like a prison. She felt a pull, a responsibility to help him rebuild his life. But helping Brandon meant exposing herself to dangers she wasn't ready for. She had her daughter to think about. If Brandon went back into the world of business, what would it mean for them? Financial stability? Or danger? She didn't know if she was prepared for what his return might bring. The conflict gnawed at her. She wanted to protect him, keep him safe from whatever demons chased him. But at the same time, the weight of their circumstances was heavy. She was stuck in a constant state of survival, and the idea of Brandon's wealth and influence could be the answer to the freedom she had longed for. But then, as if to remind her of the fragile line she was walking, the phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Chloe froze as she picked it up. A headline on the news site caught her eye. "Mysterious disappearance of Brandon Collier. The billionaire who vanished without a trace." Her blood ran cold. The article detailed his fall from grace, the scandal that had overshadowed his company, and his sudden disappearance. She had read whispers about it in the past, but now the reality of it hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just helping a man down on his luck. She was harboring one of the most powerful figures in the tech world, a man whose name had been buried under scandal and lies. Chloe stared at the screen, her thoughts racing. What had she done? Her mind whirled with the implications. If anyone found out that Brandon Collier was here, in her apartment, what would happen? What kind of trouble had she just invited into her life? Was she already too deep to escape? As she grappled with her growing anxiety, Brandon came into the room, his posture straighter, more confident. He had a different look in his eyes now. He was no longer the broken man who had stumbled onto her doorstep. Now, he was the Brandon Collier she'd seen in the news, the one who had been controlling everything behind the scenes. "I've made some calls," Brandon said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's time to reconnect with some old friends." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who he was contacting, but she feared what it meant. She could feel the past inching closer, its shadow creeping into their lives. As Brandon picked up the phone, her pulse quickened. His past was coming for him and for her, and Chloe realized, with a sudden sinking feeling, that the life she had known was about to unravel. Chloe sat on the edge of the couch, the phone in her hand trembling. The weight of the conversation she'd just had was still sinking in. Brandon's company, the one that had torn him apart, the empire that had once been his life, had found her. They had made their offer, a sum of money, more than she had ever seen in her life, in exchange for her silence. They wanted her to keep quiet about Brandon's whereabouts, to vanish with him into the shadows. The words kept echoing in her mind. "You'll never have to worry about anything again. The money will be enough for you and your daughter to live comfortably. We'll make sure you're set for life, if you agree to our terms." Chloe's hands shook, As she set the phone down, the offer was tempting. A way out of the constant struggle. Ayana's future could be secure. Free from the worry of bills, groceries, rent, everything that had kept Chloe up at night for years. She could stop working 2 shifts at Kroger, stop sacrificing her own dreams for survival. A part of her wanted to say yes, to take the money and disappear into the comfort it promised. But another part of her, the part that had let Brandon in when he was nothing more than a lost, shivering old man, struggled with the decision. How could she betray the trust he had placed in her? How could she turn her back on the vulnerable, honest man who had shared his pain with her, who had let her see the scars of his past? She couldn't betray him. She wouldn't. Chloe stood up, pacing the small room. The walls felt like they were closing in. Brandon's past was now part of her present, and no matter what she decided, she knew there would be consequences. If she took the money, she would be betraying not just him, but everything she stood for. If she refused, what would happen? Would the company come after her? Would Brandon's enemies find them both? Would they put Ayana in danger? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Was it them? Had they found her already? Brandon entered the room just as Chloe was about to move toward the door. His face was tired, but there was a fire in his eyes, a resolve she hadn't seen before. He had been more withdrawn lately, but now something had shifted in him. He knew that his past was coming, whether he wanted it or not. "You got the call," he said, his voice low. Chloe nodded, too scared to speak. She had been trying to protect him, trying to hide him from the world that had torn him apart. But now, the reality was crashing down. The world wouldn't let him hide forever. "I didn't ask for this," he continued, his voice cracking with the weight of it. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess. But now that you're here, I can't let you suffer for my choices." Chloe's chest tightened as she met his gaze. He was right, she had been pulled in, and now she was at a crossroads. Every choice came with consequences. For her, for Ayana, for Brandon. She could take the money, live a life free of fear and struggle, but it would come at the cost of everything she had come to value. Or she could stand by Brandon, stand by the man who had trusted her, and face whatever storm was coming their way together. The tension was unbearable, and Chloe realized there was no easy answer. She had to decide, and fast. Do you think Chloe's decisions were right? What would you do in her shoes? Subscribe to follow her journey and see what happens next. Chloe stood by the window, the soft hum of the city outside muffling the chaos inside her mind. The decision had been made. The weight of it was heavy on her chest, but there was no turning back now. Her eyes flicked to Brandon, who sat across the room, his posture straighter than it had been in days. There was a quiet strength about him now, a fire that had returned with a vengeance. He had been the man who had lost everything, but now he was ready to take it back. "You're sure about this?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Brandon looked up, his eyes steady, no longer clouded with the confusion that had plagued him since the night he stumbled onto her doorstep. "I am," he said, his voice firm but filled with a quiet resolve. "I can't hide anymore. I've been running from my past, and it's time I face it, but on my own terms, not the way the world wants me to." Chloe nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his decision settle between them. Brandon had made up his mind. He would step back into the world that had once broken him, but he wouldn't let it consume him again. He wouldn't let the business world dictate his future, wouldn't let it strip him of the person he had become in the quiet of her apartment. "You don't have to do this alone," Chloe said softly, her hand finding its way to his. "You've got me, and Ayana." Brandon's gaze softened, and for a moment, Chloe could see the man beneath the billionaire, the man who had been crushed by expectations, by scandal, by a life that wasn't his, the man who had wanted to disappear. But now, he was ready to step into the light again, with her by his side. "I don't know what this will bring," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty, "but I do know that I've wasted enough time hiding, and I want to start over. I want to build something that matters, something real this time." Chloe swallowed the lump in her throat, her heart a tangled mess of hope and fear. She had helped him, yes, but now she saw that their paths were intertwined in ways she couldn't have predicted. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her too. About times them asterisk. Her life, her future, everything had shifted in ways she hadn't imagined when she first opened that door to a stranger on a freezing night. "I don't know what's ahead," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "But I'm here. I'll help you however I can." Brandon gave her a faint smile, his grip on her hand tightening. "You already have. You've given me something I thought I'd lost hope." Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Hope. It was a word she hadn't let herself believe in for so long, and now here it was, standing between them, both fragile and powerful. The future was still uncertain. The road ahead would be messy, filled with challenges and fears they couldn't yet see. But in that moment, as they stood together, Chloe realized something profound. She had opened a door, not just for Brandon, but for herself. She had chosen kindness, and in return, it had unlocked something in her own heart. The world outside was still spinning, and the unknown loomed ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Chloe felt ready to face it. With Brandon by her side, and Diana asleep in the other room, the future didn't seem quite so impossible. Sometimes life changes in the most unexpected ways. If you believe kindness can transform everything, no matter the cost, subscribe to see what happens next in Chloe and Brandon's journey. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. And do well to subscribe and turn on notifications for the next story.